When you hear stories about homeowners associations, better known as HOAs, you probably expect a few things. Maybe a complaint about overgrown grass, an argument about where someone parked their car, or a notice about painting your fence the approved color. But what happened at a quiet Lakeside community shocked everyone who heard it. Because this wasn't just another story of an HOA board member acting out of line, this was a clash that exposed arrogance, entitlement, and the danger of assuming you know who you're dealing with. It all began with a woman who fit a description many people know all too well. Neighbors had long called her the HOA Karen. She thrived on enforcing rules, filing complaints, and making life miserable for anyone who didn't follow her version of order. To her, the Lakeside neighborhood wasn't just a peaceful place to live, it was her kingdom, and she acted like queen. One afternoon, her attention landed on an old cabin sitting near the edge of the lake. To her, it didn't belong. It didn't match the pristine houses built under strict HOA guidelines. She decided it was her duty to confront the man who stayed there. But what she didn't realize was that this so-called outsider was no ordinary resident. He wasn't just someone renting for the weekend, nor was he squatting illegally. The man at that cabin had more authority than she could ever dream of. Yet, in her typical fashion, she marched up to the cabin with accusations ready. She demanded to know what he was doing there, insisting he was trespassing. And when the man calmly told her he wasn't going anywhere, she didn't hesitate. She called 911. Yes, she actually dialed the police, fully convinced that law enforcement would back her up and drag this man away. What happened next turned the entire community upside down. Because the truth was about to surface. The man she tried to intimidate, the man she accused of violating HOA rules, the man she wanted gone actually owned something far greater than just a cabin. He owned the entire land the HOA was built on. In fact, he legally owned the whole county. Imagine the shock on her face when that truth unfolded. Imagine the silence that fell across the neighborhood when everyone realized just how wrong she was. What began as another petty power move by an HOA board member turned into one of the most jaw-dropping lessons in humility this community had ever witnessed. This story isn't just about a single confrontation. It's about power, arrogance, and the danger of underestimating people you don't understand. It's about how one woman's sense of control crumbled in an instant when she learned she had been challenging someone who didn't just have the right to be there. He had more rights than anyone else around. And as we unfold the event step by step, you'll see why this incident spread so quickly and why people still talk about it as a modern-day example of poetic justice. The man at the center of the storm was known to locals, but not to the newer homeowners who had moved into the Lakeside community in recent years. His name was Robert, though most people called him Mr. Rob. He was quiet, reserved, and didn't bother anyone. He lived simply in his Lakeside cabin, fishing in the mornings, reading on his porch in the evenings, and enjoying the same peaceful view he had enjoyed for decades. To him, the cabin wasn't just a place to stay, it was history. His family had built it long before there was ever an HOA, before the neighborhood was even established. But to the HOA president, the so-called Karen, Robert's cabin looked out of place. She didn't care about history. She cared about appearances, regulations, and rules that she could wield like weapons. It started with letters. She posted notices on his cabin door, each one citing some imaginary violation. One accused him of failing to register his property with the HOA. Another demanded that he pay dues. Yet another insisted he was not permitted to use the private boat ramp. Robert ignored them all. Why? Because they were meaningless. He was not under the HOA's jurisdiction. His cabin sat on his own land the HOA had no control over. But Karen didn't see it that way. To her, Robert was a problem, and problems needed to be dealt with. She complained to other board members. She spread rumors in neighborhood meetings about how an unregistered squatter was living by the lake. She even suggested that his presence was lowering property values. And when no one acted with the same urgency she did, she decided to take matters into her own hands. That's how the confrontation began. One sunny afternoon, she marched right up to his cabin, clipboard in hand, armed with her sense of authority. She demanded that Robert pack his things and leave immediately. Robert, sitting calmly in his chair, simply said, "Ma'am, I think you're mistaken. I'm not going anywhere." Her face turned red. How dare he defy her? She raised her voice, repeating her demands, warning him that he would regret ignoring the HOA. But Robert didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just sat there with the calm confidence of a man who knew the ground he stood on, literally, was his. That's when she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. The call she made was filled with exaggerated claims. She told the dispatcher a trespasser was refusing to leave community property. She claimed she felt threatened. She demanded immediate police response. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived at the scene. Now, here's where things took a turn she never expected. The officers, upon arriving, approached Robert respectfully. They asked him for identification, and he handed it over without hesitation. They asked him to explain the situation. Calmly, Robert laid out the facts. This cabin has been in my family for generations. It sits on land I own outright. And the truth is, this entire community, every lot you see, every street, every corner, sits on land I control. The HOA leases the rights. They don't own it. I do. At first, the officers were skeptical. But Robert was prepared. He produced documentation, land titles, and county records proving his ownership. And indeed, the records confirmed what he said. The HOA operated on land that was leased from Robert's family trust. They never truly owned it. They only managed it under a set of agreements that gave them limited authority, none of which extended to Robert's cabin. The officers turned to Karen. Their tone shifted. Instead of treating Robert as the problem, they began questioning her. Why had she called 911 to falsely report a trespasser? Why had she wasted police resources? Why had she exaggerated claims of feeling threatened when Robert had remained calm the entire time? Karen stammered, insisting she was only enforcing the rules. But the officers weren't buying it. They warned her about filing false reports. They reminded her that property disputes don't justify emergency calls. Then they left, leaving Karen standing there, humiliated, while Robert went back to sipping his iced tea on the porch. But the story didn't end there. Word spread quickly. Neighbors began whispering about what had happened. At first, many couldn't believe it. But when documents surfaced proving Robert's ownership, the truth became undeniable. He wasn't just some man in a cabin. He was the landowner of the entire county jurisdiction. The HOA, which Karen had treated as untouchable authority, was powerless compared to him. For years, Robert had allowed the HOA to operate freely. He didn't interfere with their rules, their dues, or their projects. He let them manage their affairs, so long as they didn't bother him. But now, with this confrontation, things had changed. He had been disrespected, falsely accused, and treated like a criminal on his own property. So Robert decided it was time to remind the HOA of their place. He scheduled a meeting with the board. At first, they tried to brush him off, but when they realized who he was, they scrambled to attend. Sitting at the head of the table, Robert laid out the reality. You all live here because my family allowed it. You manage this community because we let you. But if you continue to harass me or abuse your authority, I will revoke that privilege. I can dissolve this HOA. I can repossess this land. And I won't hesitate to do it. The room fell silent. Not one board member dared to speak. Karen, who had built her identity on bullying others, sat with her head down, suddenly stripped of power. The same woman who had once barked orders at neighbors now had nothing to say. From that day on, the HOA's tone changed dramatically. The letters stopped, the threats disappeared, and Robert was treated with the respect he had deserved all along. The community learned a powerful lesson. Appearances can be deceiving, and authority is not always what it seems. The man they had dismissed as a recluse in an old cabin turned out to hold more influence than their entire board combined. As for Karen, her reputation never recovered. People avoided her. Her credibility was gone. Eventually, she resigned from the HOA, unable to bear the embarrassment of what had happened. Some say she even put her house on the market not long after, too ashamed to stay where everyone remembered her downfall. Meanwhile, Robert continued life as usual, fishing in the mornings, reading on the porch, watching the lake. To him, none of this was about revenge or pride. It was about peace and making sure no one mistook arrogance for authority again. In the end, this story wasn't just about one woman's mistake. It was a reminder to everyone. Never underestimate people, and never assume you know who you're dealing with. Because the person you think you can push around might just be the one holding all the power.